And welcome to a brand new edition of Match Points here on TennisMajors.com, where we continue to debate and discuss the biggest topics in tennis. And this is our first episode for 2023, in which we get a chance to look back at the Australian Open as we just completed it yesterday. Look at our panel today. We are going head to head. Marion Bartoli versus Ben Rothenberg. The betting line in Las Vegas, Nevada has Marion favored minus 450, draw at plus 180, and Ben, you're a plus 275 underdog, so good luck to you on that.
My money is always on Marion here, absolutely.
As well it should be. All right, let's get at it. We just wrapped up the Australian Open. Some people have come out to say it was very disappointing. So I'll start right there with you guys. Did you find this Australian Open overall to be disappointing? Yes or no? Marion Bartoli, you go first.
No, not at all. I've been disappointed with the French results, that's for sure. We were hoping that Caroline Garcia could go really all the way, especially when Ons Jabeur started to get out of the draw quite early on, and we thought it could be her year, especially because when Amin Mauresmo won the Masters at the end of the year in Los Angeles against Marie Pierre, she went on to win the Australian Open in 2006, winning the Masters in the end of 2005. So we really felt she was coming on that as well, on that trend. Caroline, if she would have been able to take some momentum. Unfortunately, she hasn't, but I didn't feel disappointed at all. I feel the whole Novak Djokovic ability to put everything behind, and that was really the big, for me, topic of this whole Australian Open, was to see how much mentally he would have recovered and psychologically from everything he had to go through last year. And I think we saw it at the end of the match when he just went to his box. Just the mental collapse almost he had at that moment, because he just had to hold on everything within himself for 3 weeks in a row. Because basically his injury was starting to be diagnosed towards the end of Adelaide. Then he had 1 week to sort of trying to treat it. He played the first week of the Australian Open really heavily strapped throughout the first maybe even 10 days. It was only in the final when we removed the sort of big strap and kept it with just a kinesio tape. But you could clearly see that during that first week, he was not 100% whatsoever. So he had to not only manage his efforts, but try to do not sort of making the injury worse as the first matches was going on. And you have to do all of that knowing that what happened last year was still in the back of his mind somehow. So I found that effort absolutely extraordinary. And I think when you have seen the amount of congratulations that start to pour in since yesterday when he won, from even Rafael Nadal himself, that just shows that I think that even his peers are appreciating, that he just threw his whole heart in that effort. And to see Rafa and Novak coming at 22 each right before Roland Garros, who might be the last Roland Garros of Rafael Nadal, the whole drama with Rafa injury as well, I think we're definitely not short of drama, that's for sure.
Ben Rothenberg, overall, just for what it was, a disappointing Australian Open? Or no?
Yeah, I was actually pretty disappointed by a lot of it. I agree with Marion that the ending was fantastic. That actually after the last match ended, when Djokovic went into the stands and sort of lay on the ground of his player box and just sobbing after he won the title, that was the emotional sort of biggest moment of the tournament. And it came after it ended, and that was a great payoff. But I don't think before that, honestly, that the Djokovic's run had very much suspense to it in any of his matches. None of his matches were particularly close at many points. He seemed to be in control. Despite everything going on in the background, the actual matches weren't very compelling themselves, and that was a big issue. And Tsitsipas, for the most part on the men's side, also kind of rolled. He had the one tough match against Jannik Sinner in the fourth round, but other than that, his matches to get there were pretty easy as well. And then you had Nadal going out second round very meekly to Mackie McDonald, which was a disappointment for the tournament as well. Casper Ruud, also the US Open finalist, going out very meekly in the second round. Andy Murray was the highlight. Andy Murray was the one
it was extraordinary.
He was incredible, but he was out in the third round. But he was the heartbeat.
Yeah, but the first two matches, he just eliminated the whole first week. That was crazy.
He was the heartbeat of the tournament for me, Andy Murray, for sure. He was carrying the tournament.
Hold that thought, because I'm going to ask you both for your most disappointing showing on both the men's and women's side, as well as your most pleasant surprise. So let's get right into that. And Ben, you can continue then. Who had the most disappointing showing for you on the men's side?
Probably it's a split between the top two seeds. I think both Nadal and Ruud, going out second round, it's tough to be happy with either of those. Nadal obviously had question marks about his form. He really has not played well since his injury at Wimbledon. His record has been pretty terrible, and he, by his standards. And so him going out like that He was hurt. He was losing that match before he seemed to aggravate his injury late in the second set. He was already losing.
So fans of which should be more concerned right now?
Nadal, definitely. I mean, Nadal is, he's 36 already. Marion just said it could be his last French Open already. In terms of him trending in a certain direction, the trend is as negative as it's ever been for Rafa in terms of his matches. I think he's lost more matches than he's won since Wimbledon, I believe. I mean, it's just unheard of for a player like Rafa, who's been so consistent to be on this sort of streak, and he's in danger of falling out of the top 10 for the first time since 2005. In a couple months, he's on pace to do that potentially. So for Nadal, that's serious. To the extent that you think he cares about ranking, maybe he'd be fine being ranked 15th or whatever going into the French Open, and it wouldn't matter to him. He's still at the French Open if he's playing well. It wouldn't matter what his seed is. But it's definitely concerning for him. But then Casper Ruud also, who I mentioned also, after making the U.S. Open final, that kind of loss to Jenson Brooksby in the second round is definitely disappointing. To have this sort of flat of a result, and that opened up that quarter of the draw a lot for a lot of American men who took advantage, and not Brooksby, but then Tommy Paul and then Ben Shelton. There were some interesting stories from an American perspective that came out of it. But for the tour, having no continuity from the U.S. Open, which includes also the absence of Carlos Alcaraz, which I think was a big thing in this story, to not have the number one and the most recent Grand Slam champion at the U.S. Open missing from this tournament is also a big loss for the tournament. So we're just talking about the men's side, but I'm still overall disappointed. I think there were some great moments, but the big picture, disappointing for me, Australian Open.
Understood. Ryan Bartoli, on the men's side, who had the most disappointing performance for you?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with Ben on Casper Ruud, especially because when you made the final of the US Open, when you made the final of the Masters, my thought that he would carry that momentum. And for some reason, he actually said it very early on that he felt he was going to the Australian Open just because it was a Grand Slam. But he knew he would lose early, and he would actually do his pre-season after the Australian Open. I don't recall I ever heard that before from a player. He went obviously to do this whole South American tour with Rafa, and because of that, then he took his vacation after that, and just the new season was starting basically. So he had no time to get ready for it. When you're already a Grand Slam finalist in 2 occasions, between Roland Garros and the US Open, you're in the final of the Masters, you're hoping to win a slam. I mean, that's the next steps. It just goes without saying. And you just accept you have no preseason and knowing that you basically have 0 chance at the Australian Open. I just don't understand that thinking process. I found it quite weird, but I mean, if he's fine with it, okay. The second disappointment was honestly Daniil Medvedev. I felt like Daniil, last year having 2 sets to love and the break against Rafa, I felt like he hasn't recovered from that yet. That's what I see. That's what I see when I'm analyzing his whole performances after that, in Grand Slam especially. I felt this is still in the back of his mind somehow. And
Ben, do you agree? Ben, do you agree with that? What Marian's saying, that he hasn't recovered yet?
Yeah, I think there's 2 things.
From that moment?
I think there's 2 things that happened with Medvedev. I think there's the loss of the Australian Open, and then there's the war starting. And one of those 2 things, or a combination of both of them, has derailed him since last February. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. And the men's tennis need those kind of players. You need a Casper Ruud who has a different game style, but can really sort of counterpower Novak from the back of the court. And we saw it in the final of the Masters. It's not so easy for Novak to beat him. You need someone like Daniil Medvedev with his big serve to be able to really push Novak as well to his limit. And because they lost quite early, that as Ben said, it opened up the draw to some new names, which is great. But you don't give Tommy Paul a lot of chances when he's facing for the first time in the semifinal of a slam facing Novak Djokovic in the Australian Open. Let's face it. So that already is taking some sort of, the appetite for some great matches a little bit away. But for me, Andy Murray, his 2 first matches and the effort, especially against Kokkinakis, I mean, that kept me on this edge of my seat the entire night with the jet lag in France. We were just following it. It was absolutely crazy. And on the French side, my friend Sania Mirza was playing her last Australian Open, and she went all the way to the final of the mixed double. So that was definitely my highlights. And as you know, I really, really, really have a lot of respect for what Novak has done for the 22. So for me, globally, it was such a great Australian Open, even though I agree with Ben. The top names I could have really pushed, Novak was just not coming to the call. And Stefanos at the end in the final didn't either.
Okay, let's shift now to the women's side. And very briefly, the same question. Who was the most pleasant surprise for you in this Australian Open? And Ben, get us started.
For the women, I would say Magdalena for sure. I mean, a complete out of nowhere semifinalist, honestly, in a lot of ways, being unseeded, not being very highly talked about. She beat Caroline Garcia, as Marion was just mentioning, and she beat Pliskova as well in the quarterfinal to get there, and also Alexandrova was another seed in the round before that as well. So that was just completely unexpected. I mean, it's not a surprise at all that we had a Polish semifinalist with Iga Świątek and how good she's been. It's a huge surprise that the Polish semifinalist is Magda Linette. And yeah, that's just not a result you ever thought you would get from her, I think, in a lot of ways. So it meant a lot to her. That was pretty cool to see. Kind of random at some points. Yes, if you want more predictability in women's tennis, you don't expect Magda Linette in the semifinal. But a nice feel-good result for her, I think, in this tournament.
Before I said the most pleasant, I could have said also in the most disappointing Iga Świątek. You know, seeing her going out so early in the tournament was really some sort of disappointment. But I've been picking Caroline just because I really felt she was able to do it that way in this year. But for me, the pleasant surprise was the Kvitova sisters. I mean, for Brenda to qualify at such a young age, to be able to go into the main draw, and for Linda to be in the fourth round and going only in 3 sets against Donna Vekic, knowing how young they are. You can see the new generation starting to push. You have Noskova, who was in the final in Adelaide the week before, who didn't perform really well in the Australian Open, but did really well the week before. And you can see this whole new generation starting to push the under 18. And that, for me, is going to be very interesting for women's tennis, because we need to have some sort of rivalry taking place, and we need to have some new young coming girls like Coco did, like Emma Raducanu did, which our young kids can get excited about. And I felt those girls can be really the future of women's tennis and can really push also the ones that are established to go and do better and even push their game to their highest. But you know, you had so many pleasant surprises for me to see Vika Azarenka 10 years later. She won in 2013, I was still playing, and she's there 10 years later down the road with a baby boy along the way and making the semifinal and really giving a run for her money to Zabalenka. That was for me really a huge effort.
Ben, you were skeptical of Marianne's answer when she decided to go back to negativity. When she said Iga Świątek, you audibly were skeptical. Why is that?
I don't know if I hope it was that audible, but no, I thought that she...
You said,
yes. I thought that Świątek's loss wasn't as bad because, I mean, she lost to Elena Rybakina, who was Wimbledon champion, who made the final eventually. You know, that's a match that we circled as a sort of dangerous match for Świątek, and she lost. I mean, it was not something that was an unexpected loss in that sense. And Rybakina, you know, showed, I think, that she's a top 5, top 10 kind of player at this tournament.
For me, what is quite surprising is you can see on Iga's game that the areas where she has problems, in a way, are just keep coming back. You know, there is no improvement there. And this is what you don't see in men's tennis, for example. You know, in men's tennis, you have seen, you know, Novak in the past, for example, maybe sometimes the forehand or maybe sometimes the serve was a little shaky. You can see how much work he has put in there. And he just brushed it off that entirely. And for 2 weeks, he has been ripping off forehand after forehand during this whole Australian Open. And the same on the serve. Every time he needed the serve was there. I just feel in the women's tennis, and especially with Iga, we know that when you play fast into the forehand, that could be the problem. And you can see those problems keeping coming back. So I hope once again, it's just, because Elena played too good on that day. But I just don't want to see the sort of repeating one great year and then the year later you're falling and then the new number one. You know, that whole cycle I've been seeing for the past 5 or 6 years. I just don't want to see it again, please. If I could have a little bit of stability on the women's game, I will take it hands down.
I think with Iga though, it's tough to improve though when you're winning all the time. I think actually this month is helpful for her in sort of exposing some of her weaknesses, and clearly the tour and the 2 losses she took to Rybakina and to Pegula, you know, they found weaknesses in her game in the offseason, especially. I mean, Pegula lost to Świątek so many times last year that it was important for her to go in the offseason and really study and see, how do I beat this player? And she figured that out at the United Cup, and very decisively in a 6-2, 6-2 win. So now Iga knows that her serve can be attackable in that kind of way, that her, like you said, the forehand can get rushed. And those gives her things to work on. It's tough to get better, ironically, when you're winning 37 matches in a row. You know, losing is sort of sometimes what clarifies things for you and makes you be able to improve.
I agree, but, you know, once again, I found it... I mean, I don't like to keep comparing the times, but again, when I was playing, it was so hard to spot one weaknesses. You know, You play Serena, tell me one weakness, still didn't find it when I play against her. You play against Justina, I still didn't find one weakness. You play against Kim Clijsters, it was hard to see. You play against Amelia Mauresmo at her pick, it was hard to see. I just found that, even Iga won so much last year, you could tell, like even technically, that the forehand could have some issues. I mean, you could tell even on grass already when she lost against Alizé Cornet and she was coming towards the end of, that incredible run that she had starting from Indian Wells. And she would just keep on winning everything. So I just felt how that didn't get exposed before. That was my whole question. And I'm sort of, in a way, glad, if I can say it that way. I think it's healthier for women's tennis that get exposed. Because otherwise, it just put again the emphasis on saying, what are the girls doing? Which obviously it's easier to be seated outside saying, oh yeah, you should play like this rather than being on the court and do it. But I felt like we have enough good players those days to be able to expose that. So I agree with Ben saying that it's healthy that the girls have been able to do their studies, the coaches as well, obviously. And then they're coming out with new solution. And I'm going to be very fascinating to see because Iga is such a smart player and she has such a good, very experienced coach around the corner to see what they're coming up with some solutions because they're going to have to come with some solutions because now the tactic plan is clear. It's like Caroline Garcia, the tactic plan is so clear. You just have to serve the body. Everyone now is serving the body. So, when you start to have that and the other coaches are coming up with solutions, as the number one player in the world, you want to stay there. So that's going to be for me fascinating to see what kind of training, what kind of adjustment she's going to do to be able to counterpower this.
All right, let's continue now. The stars of the Netflix series Breakpoint had early exits for the most part here. Is this a coincidence, yes or no, that our reality TV stars did not stick around all that long? Ben Rothenberg, you go first.
I think it's largely a coincidence. I mean, just because there's so many different players and they have their own different stories and there's no real common reason why they were all out. Some of them were injured, some of them just lost early. There's a different mix of why they lost. But I think it's a huge disappointment for the sport, honestly. I think it actually is. People were kind of joking about the Netflix curse, but I think it actually is kind of a major problem for this show, which was so much, potential was placed on it by the tours of, this is how we grow the sport. We get the Netflix show and everyone will adapt to these players. To have no continuity then between the Netflix show and the Australian Open second week, pretty much at all, is really disappointing. That's something was seen on if you came to watch tennis, and I don't know how much. I have sort of questions about Breakpoint about how much is actually going to encourage people to watch the regular sport or not. I don't know. I don't know that the two products have very much to do with each other in a lot of ways, but definitely disappointing. I don't know that there's a common reason. That said, they didn't pick. They weren't following Djokovic and Nadal and Alcaraz. They were following some of the middle people, but at the same time, for them to go 0 for 10 or whatever in making the fourth round or quarterfinals whenever Felix, what is the last one left, whenever he went out. Definitely disappointing.
You say, but no cause and effect is what you're saying.
I don't think so. No, that seems kind of hard. Yeah.
Okay. Marianne, same question for you.
No, it's totally coincidence, but it was just funny to see that, it was kind of a curse. But, the player they picked once again, for Paula Badoza, it was unfortunate she picked up an injury in Adelaide. That's something that can happen at the beginning of the year. The body is rusty. You're coming off from the preseason. You have so much expectation on yourself. You're a little bit more tense. You can pick up easily a muscle injury. We've seen it with Novak even. He was able to play through it, but, maybe Paula once was, great or something. For Nick, he's not the most reliable kid. Guy around the world. He's not going to play a full schedule. Obviously, you think he's going to play in Australia, but then again, he had an injury. But the one they picked, it's just, again, like Ben said, if you pick Novak, if you pick Iga, and if you pick Rafa, you're more likely sure that one of them is going to go out till the end. It's just, who are you picking to show as your first episode? I think they just didn't understand that maybe as a first episode they should have, and I don't know through the whole season how many times I've been able to film Djokovic. I don't know. They were there in the Wimbledon because they filmed me when I was commentating, so they're probably going to show that. But it's just who you start with. Probably that was just a small mistake from Netflix or the mistake from whoever did that. But I don't think he has an effect. I think people were genuinely interested to understand. As someone not like us, where obviously we know the tour inside out, someone is just sometimes, occasionally watching tennis, okay? It turns out on this series, it's like, okay, I'm actually learning some stuff. I didn't know it was going through that way. I didn't know the behind the scene. there's a lot of things that some people will be able to pick up and say, oh, actually, that's a sport I want to follow. I think it's the whole point of that series. And I don't think it's about, oh, I've seen someone on my screen and then I want that person to win. I just don't think that was the whole image or scenario that the people who filmed it wanted to have. I think the whole thing, because it's the people who have been doing Drive to Survive, right? So Drive to Survive, you have the same teams going out from every single Grand Prix to the other ones. Okay, so it's the same names all the time. But you see the last one from us, they are not picking up points towards Mercedes. The whole point is to go through the whole spectrum. It's not only following the ones who are winning, because otherwise it's just a bit boring, to be honest. It's actually to see the downs and to see the difficulties and to see the tears and to see mental breakdown. It's just to see all of that. And then someone will say, oh, okay, actually tennis is not that easy. I actually like that person, even if it sounds weak or she's crying or he is crying or he has difficulty. I actually emphasize for that. And I feel bad for her or for him. And therefore, I want to get interested and follow her results. And I don't think there is a direct correlation saying, oh yeah, I just want to see someone on my screen and I want to see that person winning.
I would imagine that the producers didn't get their exact wish list on who they wanted to follow. That would be my guess. But let me ask you, how good will this reality show actually be for tennis? Ultimately, will it prove to be beneficial to the growth of the sport and viewership of the tournaments in real time? Yes or no?
It can't hurt. I mean, it definitely can't be bad for tennis, but it's just a question of how big the bump will be is to be determined. And Drive to Survive didn't have its biggest bump after the first season either. I mean, it took a couple seasons for Drive to Survive really to become a major international phenomenon. It really has changed Formula One fandom, especially in the U.S. People didn't care about Formula One at all before Drive to Survive. Now people are aware of it in a much bigger way because of this TV show. Tennis is starting from a stronger point. People are more familiar with tennis already than they were with Formula One, certainly in the U.S. But I don't know. The ratings on Netflix for when they came out were not very strong for Breakpoint. Did not rank. I think it came in all the countries of Netflix. It was in the top 10 in only 3 countries, and it was number 9 in Australia and New Zealand and Ireland. That was it upon its release. So not a big splash that it made in terms of the ratings. And I disagree with Marion, though. I do think some continuity between the characters that you get to know and care about on TV and then seeing on the TV show on Breakpoint and then getting to see them on court would matter. I do think people will be like, oh, I remember Taylor Fritz and his whole episode with the ankle, and now he's out there and I'll watch him. But starting with 2 new strange players to you, I think it's going to be harder to get that continuity from. So I do think that having all the players go out was a real problem. And some of it was bad luck. I mean, they had 2 of the number 2 seeds. They had Jabeur and Ruud, and they both lost second round. So that's bad luck for the tournament, even if their roster was not the best. It wasn't terrible either.
Marion, how beneficial will this show actually prove to be for the game of tennis and for viewership and ratings, etc.?
Well, I think it would be very beneficial. Then I understand Ben's point because he's looking at it as a US spectrum. But, there is a lot of other countries outside of the US that actually would be very interested. And that was a great example with Formula One. Formula One has a very, very penetrated market in other countries. Then the US was always the one being a little bit more behind because you have so many US sports are just so big in the US that it was difficult to penetrate the market, and they have been able to do it with Drive to Survive. I think for tennis, it's just to be able to bring tennis to a lot more houses. I don't think it's specific to one market. I don't think, when I was talking to Mickey Lawyer, for example, the head of the WTA, the whole point of that was not to target one single market. It was just to make sure that tennis and some familiar names are going to more houses. And obviously Netflix is the best platform for that because it's just accessible to so many. When actually right now, when you look at where tennis is broadcast, is a lot more paid channels. You have to subscribe to this, to subscribe to that. A lot of people have Netflix. It comes out on the dashboard and they click on it and they say, okay, let me look at it. It sounds interesting. And that's the whole point of it. And if out of that we get either more fans to watch or on TV or more fans to watch on the stadium, knowing that, the tour is going, whether ATP or the WTA, to a lot of places around the world, that's a win. And that's the whole point of that series. And where I agree with Ben is I don't think it will pick up in the first season. I think it needs a little bit of momentum. It needs little bit of traction for people to start to say, okay, I'm going to watch season 2, I'm going to watch season 3. Actually, when I get really interested, let me go back and watch season 1. I think that's the whole point of that. And if we drive more fans into the stadiums outside of the Grand Slams, Because right now the Grand Slams are very popular. When you look at the attendance at Wimbledon, the attendance of Roland Garros, at the US Open, the Australian Open, it was just packed, right? So it's how we can drive that towards the other events. The small ITP 250, the small WTA 250, a small WTA 500, how you can get a packed stadium there. And I think it's by just putting tennis out there a lot more often than just during a tennis tournament.
Well, I just think it's not automatic. As much as it might seem like it's going to be the thing that the Drive to Survive people will watch a show about tennis and then they'll start watching tennis, you have to bring them over. And I think it was a very tough Australian Open to watch from an American perspective for a lot of ways. I mean, ESPN was barely putting it on TV, real TV in the US. It was almost all only on streaming. And there's other different things about accessibility in terms of making that transition. That's something tennis has to be effortful about. You have to make sure that fans know when and where to go, because tennis is a tough sport to follow. It's different time zones all over the world throughout the year. And it would be nice if, for example, like if Netflix picked up the rights to live tennis and had both in the same place. That would be amazing for tennis if it was actually, you could make that transition. But there is a real gap to navigate between getting from watching these 5 episodes of this TV show, which are very specific in their sort of tone, to then want to tune in to watch, hours of just normal match coverage. Those are very different products, even if the material in tennis is the same. And I think the tennis has to have a plan in terms of social media engagement, advertising, whatever it is, to get those people from one point A to point B. Because I think that's not as simple as it might seem.
Yeah, I mean, if you look, Ben, at the attendance between the two finals, you had Elena Rybakina from Kazakhstan, Aryna Sabalenka from Belarus. You can't tell they're the most incredible advertising countries in the world. And still you had 2 packed stadiums. Whether it was the men's final or the women's stadium, it was absolutely packed on both sides. So I think tennis is still going, especially in Grand Slams. The Grand Slam are not the issue. When now I'm turning on my TV and I watch a WTA in Lyon, it's absolutely empty. There is just no people. And it was Garbiñe Muguruza playing, 2-time Grand Slam champion, number 1 in the world. It was just empty. And that's the whole transition between the Grand Slam when it just drives almost by itself. Just because people love the name of a Grand Slam, you go to Wimbledon. You don't actually go to watch a player almost, you go to a place. You go to Wimbledon, you go to the US Open, you go to the Australian Open, you go to Roland Garros. There you have to make the effort to go and see one player specifically. And I think that transition, that's where tennis is suffering, because you can't have one full stadium. Almost whoever is playing on the women's tour, I'm talking, the men's is slightly different, but on the women's, whoever is playing, it's going to be packed because it's a Grand Slam. And then you transition that 2 days later to a country, France, who has an history of tennis, and it's just nobody, where it's a Grand Slam champion on the court. And that's where I feel that we have to bring tennis more often into the screen of people. So they're like, oh, okay, hold on a second, I have a tournament in my town.
Yeah, but I don't know that Breakpoint is going to make anyone care about Lyon, honestly, because Breakpoint was so much about the biggest tournaments and it was mostly about Grand Slams and like finals and prizes and stuff. I do agree with you. The focus should be on getting the 250s, 500s healthier in the sport. That's where the problem is. I mean, the thousands are mostly okay. The Grand Slams are doing excellent, and you can put anybody in a Grand Slam final, and people will show up. I remember seeing that at the U.S. Open in 2014. It was like a Monday final. It was Nishikori and Cilic, and I was like, is anyone going to come to this match? And it was still full, because people care about the U.S. Open final. The U.S. Open final is the attraction more than it's an event. It's a place to go, and that's the brand. Even that will endure beyond any of these current players. Even with Federer and Serena and Rafa and Novak gone, people will still go to Wimbledon and the U.S. Open every year. Those are not going to be touchable. Where the variance is at the lower levels of the sport. And yeah, that's something that Netflix, I don't think, was really making any effort to get people to care about 250s, honestly, in their show so far. It would be nice if they did. But yeah, I just think it's not automatic. And also, we'll say as much as attendance was good at the Australian Open, on Australian TV, they said ratings were 40% down from last year, which is a huge drop. And also, they lost some big attractions. They lost Barty, they lost Kyrgios. They didn't have Nadal making the final like he did last year, but 40% is a big, big drop on domestic TV for the Australian Open.
All right, shifting gears now, we talk about racing in F1. Very quickly, Goran Ivanisevic said that a majority of players in Novak's situation would have pulled out. Do you agree with that assessment, yes or no? Ben?
It's tough to know exactly what the extent of Novak's injury was to make that kind of declaration. But yeah, I think Novak is certainly tougher than the average player, and that's pretty clear. And, it's part of why this older generation, honestly, is probably doing well still ahead of the younger generation. It's that there's a certain kind of toughness and determination and fortitude that the younger generation doesn't quite have. I mean, it's crazy that still Novak Djokovic was born in 1987, and no one born after 1987 has, on the men's side, has still won the Australian Open or French Open or Wimbledon. Like, that's crazy. There's some sort of shift in the makeup of players happening here, for the worse in terms of being competitively strong. And yeah, so I don't, again, I'm not a doctor. I didn't see Novak's scans. I don't know exactly what his sort of levels of anything were, but I think there is something to be said for sure that the older guys, Djokovic included, have been tougher on that basic level.
Marian, would you agree with the assessment that a majority of players in Novak's situation would have pulled out? Yes or no? You agree?
Yeah, I actually say 97% because they were probably thinking about Rafa and maybe in one other name that came to his mind. But I completely agree with him. He's made with something else. And again, I mean, for anyone who has played this sport, when you have to go what he went through last year, which is basically hell, for a month and a half or 2 months, feeling like he's standing alone against everyone else because he's believing into something, then you have to agree or not with that, but that's the reality. And came out on that same tournament, injured, clearly, and go on and win it with just losing one set to Enzo Cuoco. I mean, if you don't say hats off to that, I don't know when you're going to say hats off. This is just insane in terms of ability to push back your own boundaries, to just, keep on plugging in every single day, keep on brushing on the side every single negativity that could come out, and just keep on going to the task. And when we see Korda, for example, putting out, when I saw Korda played in Wimbledon a few years back against Khachanov, I said, this guy is going to be a top player. I mean, he was just so still mentally. He's just so strong, but yet he had to pull out during a match. And Novak didn't. And I put Korda really, really being strong mentally, and I love this kid. But Djokovic is just something else. The guy was doing 7 physio sessions a day to biofeedback machine to be able to heal his injury on each day off. And then you go, you put everything on the side, you perform, you win. And again the day after, and again the day after, and again after. I can tell you that winning 7 matches in the Grand Slam, it's a very, very long process. It's draining emotionally, it's draining mentally. It's something else to follow it as a journalist. Now I'm in the media part. When I go through a Grand Slam, 50 days goes by relatively fast. You go one by one. You go through a schedule, you do your matches, fine. As a player, it's a total different dynamic. To stay 100% focused on the task for 15 days in a row with all the press, all the craziness, and all the circus that's going on, especially for him this year, that in itself is extraordinary. And you add on this on top, the whole injury he had to deal with. I mean, and he said it himself, that's one of the most incredible efforts in sport I ever seen.
All right, let's shift gears one more time and let's talk about the other half of what remains of the big three, now the big two. I'm going to ask you a predictive question. How many more majors will Rafa Nadal win? What's the number? It's somewhere between 0 and 3, I would imagine. Ben, what's your guess?
My guess is 0. I think it's the safest bet at this point. I'm ready for you to disagree with me. That's the point of this show. So I'm going to say 0. And because his results have been really disappointing. Like, if you're believing in Rafa winning another Grand Slam at this point, you're believing solely in, like, the Rafa magic, which is real. And obviously we've seen it before. Exactly, we've seen it before, but at some point it will stop, right? Who would have thought, like, when Federer won the 2018 Australian Open for his, second Australian Open in a row and winning that 5-set final against Cilic, that would be the last Grand Slam for a title for him. But it was. He got to US number 1 right after that, but he never won another Grand Slam again. At some point, the run will stop. At some point, it will dry up. And for me, with Rafa, I just think the results haven't been there to justify. I think 0 or 1 is the question, and I'm taking 0.
Marian, I'm not sure that you disagree with Ben by your audible signal, but yes, how many? How wrong is Ben, and how many will Rafa win?
I do disagree. I do disagree entirely. I say 1. I think 1, and I think it's obviously 1 Roland Garros. I think Rafa knows that everywhere else it's just becoming really difficult. But I think he has 1 Roland Garros left in his body. And I want to be the one interviewing him when he will win his last Roland Garros and probably announce that's the end, that's the final retirement. But I do believe that Novak will top all of that. And I think he will finish. I think he has...
All right, we'll move quickly here.
At least three more for him. I would go 3 more for Novak. He will finish at 25, 26, and one more for Rafa.
Back to the women's side, and let's talk about the champion for just a second because we failed to thus far. Aryna Sabalenka, you're now champion, and there was a point here she was serving underhand not that long ago. Has she now officially arrived? Ben, is she now there?
Of course, she's holding a Grand Slam trophy. That's very much being there and being arriving. Absolutely. She was incredibly impressive what she did from a year ago where she really couldn't serve and it was embarrassing and awkward to watch, honestly. This great player who was double faulting constantly, going to underarm serves, like you said. It was really bleak for Sabalenka, and she was beating herself, and it was chaotic and messy and everything. And then so for her, within a year, to put in the work mentally and physically to change her serve and to change her attitude and to survive that, and then the women's final, which was a great match, by the way, that was the other highlight of the tournament. The two big highlights were the women's final and then Djokovic's reaction to the men's final. I think were the two best points. But the quality, the women's final was incredible throughout. But when Sabalenka started that match with a double fault on the very first point, it's sort of like, this could be rough with the nerves and the first time there and everything. But she recovered from that and just played really, really well. I thought that was a really, really great display for Sabalenka and for women's tennis from Rybakina as well. Because like Marion said, this was a very anonymous final in a lot of ways for most casual fans of the sport. These are not two well-known names. But they delivered. They delivered, and so what she did also last year. She beat Swiatek in the semifinals of the year-end championships as well, which was another great win. So it's not just this one result that she's had, in terms of building up. And she won Adelaide also. She's won 21 out of 21. She's won a lot. She's doing great. It's real.
Right, because being a major champion doesn't automatically mean that you are.
But she's already won like 11 other titles. She's been in the top 5. Been number 2 before, as high as that. She's an established person. This is not someone coming like Raducanu, let's say, out of nowhere, and being a complete surprise and having to process what this person can do. Sabalenka was a very known quantity on the tour, so I think she's very credible that way.
Marion, you're our only major champion here on this panel, or any panel that we always have, so you know better. Sabalenka, is she now officially there? Has she officially arrived?
Well, she was there for me since a long time, but it was about putting it together for 7 matches in a row. That was really the whole question for her. But there's two things that when I analyze this whole Australian Open, for me there's two things that strikes out. One is Aryna saying, well, I've been stopping to work with a sports psychologist because I knew I had to figure out the solution on my own. And that's why I'm strongly believing in having being out there and knowing how difficult it is. But the problem is no one can feel the exact same thing as you. And you have to find a solution yourself. And I believe in that. And I think because she went through that process, she came out a lot stronger mentally through this whole thing, because knowing her now since quite a while, a few years back, she has been always having some roller coaster emotionally, and for example, I can recall a match in Roland Garros when she played Nastasia Pavlyuchenkova, the year when Nastia made the final, and all of a sudden she started to swing well and she win the second set very easily, and there is a stop in the match, and then after that she just couldn't swing a ball in the court for absolutely zero reason. It was just all mental. She was at some point could get her focus out and just losing it. And it's not because of her tennis. We always knew that she had the tennis. When she played Maria Sharapova in the final in the Chinese tournament, and they were just going toe to toe, hitting the ball and just smashing the ball, she had the game. It was just about how mentally strong she could be for 7 matches in a row. And we saw her at Wimbledon in the past. She was able to knock at the door. She was quite there. And then all of a sudden, this sort of last few steps, she was falling. And now to see her really lifting that trophy, I got very emotional when she talked about her dad and her dad watching from above and being proud of her. I think that was really, really well said. And you could feel the emotion and you couldn't share that moment with her. But there is one thing I want to say is, and I think few commentators talked about it, Pam Shriver included, the way Rybakina's coach is talking to Rybakina's on the court is just not something I can accept. That's just, I just can't take that anymore. And I sincerely hope for her sake and for her to be able to continue that game, that she will be able to find a coach that talks with respect to her, no matter what the result is, because she's really trying her hardest on the court. And to see someone going out hard at her in such a negative way, and I've been seeing that in the past myself in much more events when I was with Jelena Ostapenko and she was playing those events as well. In some, practice court when there's no cameras or whatever, he's behaving in some way that's something I can't accept. And I really hope for her that she's not only seeing the results and saying, yeah, okay, it works, so I keep on going in even if I get sort of abused. mentally and with the wording, and I just keep going because he gives me the result. But she realized that it's not healthy.
And we'll leave that right there, table this conversation, and pick it up as we see as the season progresses. Both of you, Ben, Marion, thank you so much. Folks, remember, follow on all social media platforms, as well the audio episodes of all the shows here on this site. For our panel, Josh Cohen saying thanks for watching. We will catch you next time for the next episode of Match Points right here on tennismajors.com.